All right, so back again. We've done our grunt work in layer.js. We've converted all of these to return objects. Those objects have some attributes. We've just added this name in there so that we can show you that it really is just an object. You can add anything in there, a string and a function and all kinds of stuff. We do want to do this for one other thing. Remember, we were using test lines back in the day, and we want to use it again. So I've added state there, and in a couple of places we've had to add state. So if you want to pause and make sure that yours looks the same, go ahead. Also notice that I've converted all of the helper functions that were previously written in a pre-ES6 syntax to an ES6 syntax. So if you want to make everything exactly the way it is here, you can do that. You can leave them, really, it doesn't matter. Yeah, so that's what we've done. And now that we have, let's just review how our shapes are being drawn. Back in sketch.js, we were creating a new crystal for every position in our grid. And we got that position here by looping through our canvas. And then we went into the constructor for crystal class. In there, we were doing layer constructors dot for each. This is just looping through an array of something. And in there, we were comparing our random number to whatever the weight of that thing was. And then we were creating that thing, which was basically a layer, right? So let's take a look at that. That's what layer constructors is. Remember, this is just an easy way for us to organize what kinds of shapes we can create and what the weight of those things are. And if you forget what this is, you can go back in the videos and see how we changed that, or how we built that. Essentially, assuming that you remember all of that, we need to figure out how to change this new syntax, both here and here, to use our new composition architecture. So let's begin. The important thing here is that we are essentially initting, or we're making a crystal, and then later we render that crystal. So there's two different things happening here. That's a pretty good indication of needing two different functions. So why don't we just start off by creating a make crystal function, and then let's do the same with a draw crystal function. Okay, so far so good. And it looks like in the make one, we expect to get a pos x and a pos y. All right, so we can expect to get a pos x and a pos y in make crystal, and then we're going to do this stuff. Here we're just setting them to the crystal class, so that's not a big deal. We create this layer array. We don't have to worry about that right now. And basically we would be pushing all of these to the array inside of this thing. But for now, let's just worry about actually getting that stuff in layer constructors.for each. So this is what we would be doing. And remember, all of this adds up to an array of stuff, right? That's what we were doing. So there's another way to do that in JavaScript. Instead of for each, we can use the map function. And that's going to create an array of layers. So we could just say layers equals, and it's going to loop through all of these, and for each one of those, it will init. And instead of pushing, for the map function, we just return. And that means that every time it goes through here, it will return an init, return the result of this, and put it inside of here as part of a new array. So at the end, we'll have a new array. Okay? So that's the very beginning of sort of what we want to do. And if we were to do that, then we would replace this with make crystal. And then we're assigning it and logging it and doing other stuff with it. So that means that we're expecting make crystal to return something. But right now it actually isn't. This return is just filling up the layers array. And we're logging that array. So while we're at it, let's also return it. All right, that seems a little bit better. And just to verify that it's actually being returned, why don't we log it here? And that should be the same thing. All right, and then we'll sort of ignore everything else for right now. So we are going to send it pos x, pos y, which are just numbers. We're not doing anything with that yet, but that's okay. And then we're doing all of this stuff, which should just go through here. We're going to come back to pos x, pos y, so hold on to your boots for that. But our next problem is that it's going to call this init function, and that init function has a bunch of these, and we broke all of that. So we can't do that. But what do we have in place of that? Well, we have our test lines function up above, or we have our stepped hexagons function. So let's just get rid of all that. That's cool. That makes sense. Okay, this is almost ready. We're missing something inside of here, right? We created these to be able to accept a state of some kind. And they're going to use whatever's in that state to draw all their stuff. So we need to give them that information. Well, we've created a way for us to make up that information. If we call setState and we give that an object, it will take that object and modify it and give it back to us. Perfect. Let's use it. This is a global variable. Since it's up here at the top and it's in its own scope, it's loaded with everything else. So we can just say setState state. And what that does is, just to review, it takes whatever's inside of here and it passes it into our function. It takes that and modifies it by adding stuff or overriding it, and then just returns it back. So this is an object. That object goes to outline shape. Where's outline shape? Here's outline shape. And we use that object to draw all of our stuff. Cool. So let's just add that into everything. And let's see if we can run it. Great, we're getting stuff. So now, just so you know where we are, we're here. And we're logging the result of make crystal. So for this shape, if we haven't drawn anything yet, if we were to draw it, it would draw 3 layers. And the rest were undefined. Why does it say undefined? Well, in here, when we're going through layer constructors, if this thing is true, then we init. If not, we're not doing anything. There is no else here. So nothing happens. And we're returning. What it does is, if we don't specify something to return, it just returns undefined. So for those, it's undefined. All right, so we have a crystal. What is a crystal? Right now, a crystal is an array of objects. And then we want to render them. So how might we render these? Well, we have the draw crystal thing, right? And basically, it's going to push, translate, go through all the layers, draw them, and pop back. That's what we used to do anyway. Well, let's see if we can do that again and see. We're going to run into some troubles. But let's see if we can do it anyway. Does that work correctly? Yeah, it does. It's just this one's off. All right. So how do we know? All right, well, first, let's say there is no this.x or this.y. There is no this.layers as an array, but this is expecting an array. Okay, that's interesting. Well, look at this. We have an array of stuff. So let's say, let's keep going with this and use what we have. So really, we're going to be receiving here a crystal object. When we print it out, is an array of objects. So here's what it is. We have an array of objects. Well, let's use that in here. Okay, if that's what a crystal is, then we can say crystal.forEach, and we're just going to loop it. We're not going to do anything to it, so we don't need to use map. And what we're really looping through are these layers. So each time we go through the loop, we get one of these objects. And so we can here call it layer, because that's what it really is. And that'll help us understand what we're doing. And inside of there is where we want to do this stuff. Cool. And so we would want to translate to whatever the XY coordinates are for this crystal. And then for that layer, we would want to render it, right? So instead of this, we don't need this anymore. Because basically inside of here, let's say, so this is This is the layer object. That's what this is going to be. And we get to it, and we just want to call the render function. And the render function is going to do all that it wants to do. Cool? All right, so that's what we want. But we have this problem now with the x and the y. It's not in there. Well, we are getting it. Remember, we're getting it here with pos x and pos y. Let's take a moment to review the concept of composition. Composition relies on the ability to be modular. So we can just pass objects around and return objects from functions and keep doing that over and over again. So in that way, it's best to always create things as objects. Do things as objects as much as you can is the kind of the simple rule. And let's just create this object with an x and y and pass it to make crystal. Okay, so now our goal, in other words, is we should be able to pass an object to this function, and it should be able to incorporate that information into whatever it's doing here. So how would we do that? Well, now we know that it's an object, and we're going to get it. And what we really want to do is include that in whatever this init function is. So we might think that we could do something like, all right, we'll just throw it in there, and then that means that all of these need a pause, and then that, okay, that's fine, we could do that. But then what if we wanted to do something else here? Or there was another function where we wanted to affect our crystal. Composition allows us to do that if we create a system that is very flexible. The way you create that flexibility is basically by being able to accept an object at any time and use that object to call functions. That's very abstract and probably does not make a lot of sense, but let me show you what it means. We're going to call those props. And we'll do the rest here, but I'm going to show you what I mean. So instead of just throwing it in and us having to know what it is, why don't we say that it's always going to be an object? Now it's clean. Now we can pass that down into here, and it will become part of our layers. So what that looks like is pos is equal to pos. So our object is now getting its own key. And we can throw other stuff in there too. Right? For instance, we have this problem with undefined. Well, why don't we add an attribute that's called draw? And if it's true, then down here we'll check it and we'll draw it. And if it's false when we check it, we'll just skip it. So now we're adding power to our system by making it more flexible. So how would we do this? We could do something like const draw equals this. This is always going to return true or false. And now we can add it in. So there's a shortcut way to do this in ES6. You don't have to, if it's called the same thing, you don't need it. So we're going to do that. So now this is not necessary, but we're doing it anyway because, did I want to do that? Or is this just off? I think that's just, yeah, I don't need that anymore. I think that's right. Yeah? Okay. What we're trying to illustrate is how you think about composition. And the way that you want to do that is to, just as we did in set state, be able to take in an object, modify it, and return. What are we doing here? We're taking in an object, we're modifying it, and we're returning. That is exactly what we want to do all the time as much as possible. And this allows us to be extremely flexible and modular, which is what this guy was talking about. So we need to do a couple of things here, and we're going to do them one at a time because that's the only thing we can do. So, all right, great. We've created this new information in this little tiny two-thing object, and now that's being added to init. Fine, but we need to also pass it along into test lines. Otherwise, it just dies right here. It doesn't do anything. So the way that we can do that is, again, this was going to return an object. Remember, that's what it does. It returns whatever was added in, is modified and returns. We want the exact same thing to happen here. So what we would do is create an object and put everything that setState returned into that object, as well as whatever props give us. So this syntax you can look up as a spread ES6 thing. Yeah, there you go. Spread in array, and it should be spread in object literals, right? So it's cloning objects basically into a new object. It's taking anything that was inside of this object and just adding it into this new object. So this is extremely flexible now. Props could be anything. We could, run a bunch of functions in here that add to whatever this object is. We can modify it here. We can do all kinds of things. All that we care about is that it ends up as an object, and that we take whatever's inside of there and we add it to what we're passing to test lines. Additionally, we're going to make sure that all of these have the bare minimum of what they need in order to be rendered correctly. So setState is really concerned with everything we need to draw stuff. But our crystals need more information than that. They need position information. They also need to know if they should be drawn or not. In other words, as you change the functionality of your application and what it can do over time, the best possible strategy is to make a system that's flexible from the beginning so that you don't run into the problems that were illustrated in that video. And that's what we're doing here. So let's continue with this and just put all of these in here so that everything is the same. And then we want to do the same thing that we've done here with the props and setState. So we can do that and that. So everything's really the same. The only difference here is really the weight. And you could make an argument actually for including that in the make crystal, but at this point we're getting into nitpicking, and you can decide on all of those decisions for your own system after you finish these videos. Have a blast. Okay, great. Okay, great. So we have this pause. It's going in. It's now part of our stuff. Well, now we want to be able to use it. We want to be able to say, pause.x and pause.y. Well, really, this is crystal.pause.x and crystal.pause.y. But that's not what we have. So let's take a look. In here, we have objects, and it has a name, and it has a render function. Well, where's the pause? So we've passed in this object, and we have this. But when we return, we're only returning the name and the render function. Well, we have all of the other stuff in this state object that's being passed in. We're just not returning it. So let's return it. And then we'll have everything we need. What's even better about this is that the state of the crystal now gets returned, and we can do anything we want to it. And as long as we continue to return the state after we've modified it, then we never have to worry about messing something up. We'll always know the state, because now every time we mess with it, we're passing it right back to ourselves. So now, if we take a look, we have the name, we have the render function, and we have the state. And inside of state, now we know all the angles, the layer colors, we have this pause thing. Great, lovely. So now we can say crystal.state, state.pause.y, draw crystal. Okay. That's looking pretty good. So we haven't drawn anything because we're focusing on how to build a system that is modular and flexible. And now that we have the state, every time we call those init functions, now we have all the information we need about a particular crystal, and we can do whatever we want, whenever we want, such as, adding each one of those crystals to an array, and later calling render on it. Now here, render is it already knows that it's a function, so that's kind of redundant. And I thought I was going to see some stuff, but I didn't. So I'm going to pause for just a second. And, well, am I going to pause or should I try? You should watch me figure this out. And then if it becomes too painful, then I won't anymore. Okay, so we're pushing and we're translating to, oh, this should be layer. Duh, you probably saw that already. Okay, and layer.render, and we're popping back out. So that all looks fine. And we've got our pause up here, and we're returning the result of our .map. We have our picker, and all of that is set. This is all good. I don't really see a reason why this shouldn't work at the moment. So I'm gonna troubleshoot, and I'm gonna come right back, okay? But I'm such a moron. We don't have crystal.render. A crystal is an array of layers. Those layers want to render by themselves. So what do? We've solved this issue already. We're rendering the layers individually inside of draw crystal. So what I really want to do is draw crystal and send it the crystal. Remember, that was the whole reason we did this. So now we get our crystals. Oh, I get some extra retardedness because my my test lines are all weird. We should not translate width divided by 2, height divided by 2. We should translate, oh, in fact, we don't want any of that translation happening. So we can get rid of that. Maybe that does it. Yeah, that does it. Okay, cool. But for now, we also want to turn that off. So this is the other great part about why, and we're almost done, why we have done it this way. This will allow us to add more flexibility wherever we want. So you may, I'm going to add a new version of test lines, and you can read through this whenever you want. But essentially all that it does is add the ability. See, we're drawing an ellipse, and we're drawing all of the spokes, all of the lines coming out of the middle. All I'm doing here is I'm adding the ability to say, if this attribute lines true is true, then draw the spokes. And if circle true, then also draw the outline. All right, that's all that's saying. And I want the ability to turn off my test shapes and maybe just turn off the circle or just turn off the spokes, whatever. Now I can do that. I can add in lines and circles. I'm calling them lines true, circles true. So lines true. Oh, that's stupid. Just lines and circle. Why don't we do that? Lines and circle. So this is, I'm just illustrating for you, and we should see those. Whoa! That did not go well. Well, let's troubleshoot it. So basically, the point is that we can add attributes into this object, and they get sent along with everything else into the functions that we're calling. Those functions return themselves, and we get to use them wherever we want. So in this case, we're sending an object that has these two attributes, lines and circle, to test lines. And inside of here, test lines, we're looking for state.lines and state.circle. So did I spell them right? Yes. And if it's true, then it should do state.angle, which is here. Okay, that's good. And it's also going to do state.crystal size. I don't think we set crystal size anywhere. Did we? Why don't we do this instead? Let's see if that works. Yep, that was better. Okay, so obviously something's wrong with my rotation and all of that. So it's not drawing correctly. I could go through here and troubleshoot that, but that's really not the point. The point is that I can turn this stuff off. So for instance, those lines aren't drawing correctly. Let's redraw it. Oops. Cool. Hey, how about this? Why don't we turn everything else off now that we have this fancy function? That really should have worked. Oh, we're not checking for it. Duh, we have to check for it, man. So for each, if layer.state.draw. Only if that draw is true will we actually push and pop and draw and all that. Okay, now let's try it. Great, so now nothing's drawing, nothing at all, right? So instead of draw equals this, we might say, you know, if draw equals lcon.name is equal to test lines. So we can just get rid of that. Go back to this. Cool. And then I can turn my lines back on. Like I said, they're drawing incorrectly. That's really bugging me. Rotate state.angle. I don't know if I'm setting my num shapes correctly. Oh, state.num shapes, state.sides, state.sides. And does our state have sides? I believe it does. Yep. Oh, I'm just being redundant here, so that's dumb. We can get rid of that. Oh, who knows why? I should probably not be doing this. Let state.angle. That's our problem, rotating by that angle. Something's up. State.num shapes equals random select to state.sides or state.sides times 2. How would I troubleshoot this? I would do this. Console log state.num shapes and make sure that we're getting something good. 612, 612. Okay, so that's all good. And oh, it's because before I was using radians and here we're not. Okay. And then instead of 2 pi, we want 360. There we go. Much better. So that was just me forgetting what I had done in my practice stuff over here that I copy pasted from. I switched to 360 because it's just easier, and in processing it, it's not a big deal. Cool. So we've added the ability to do this. So one more time, I can turn this off. We can do that. It's great. So in this case, I want them both off. I can get rid of this. I'll save it in case I ever need to debug again and only do one of these. And we should have our crystals back. Great. So we have done it. We have successfully translated our application into composition. We've made it modular. We've made it flexible. We can add things anywhere. It's really just about passing objects and returning objects. That is what functional programming is all about. And just to compare to sort of what we had, you will notice that some of this stuff does have the prototypes of arrays, but that will always be the case in JavaScript. And what's most important, gross, is that we've done away with all of the stuff that comes along with classes. All the extra stuff that comes along with classes, we no longer have. And it's a lot simpler and a lot more flexible when we decide to make changes. That's really what this is about. You can make arguments about size and speed. To me, those are much less important than the ability to be flexible in the design of your program as you make changes over time. You could come back to this in a month and say, you know what, I want to be able to animate these. Well, I'm going to guarantee you it's going to be a lot easier with composition than it will be with classes in the long run. So that could be an opinion. You can disagree with that. But that concludes this series. I hope it's been fun for you. Also, I want to say flat out that I do not always do this the best way because I'm learning too. So if you are more experienced and you have a way that you want to do, you think that I'm doing it wrong, then please tell me. I would love to see different ways to do this. I'm totally open to feedback. You can send me an email. It's this. Or you can leave a comment, but be nice because I put a lot of time into this. All right, that's enough talking. Goodbye.